Since we came back from our trip from Brazil, we have been sharing so much about Geraldo Lemos Neto and the much that he shared with us about Chico Xavier and all the friends of Chico Xavier in Brazil. The latest issue of the Spiritist magazine published part of this research that we did a little bit with some of them in some areas of Brazil. And we are so grateful that he's coming to us to share more. At Kardec Radio every Wednesday, Geraldo Lemos Neto has been sharing more and more about Chico Xavier's legacy. For those who are new to Spiritism or who may be asking, why are we focusing so much on Chico Xavier, right? People can call him Chico, Xavier, however you want to call him. It's up to you. It's okay. But what is important is he is the medium of all times. No question. For us in Spiritism, we see him as an inspiration. But more than that, like in any science, because Spiritism is a science, in any science, there are findings that are brought to life thanks to the efforts of devoted scientists. In a way, Chico Xavier brings to us revelations, findings, that if we pay attention to it, we will make less mistakes in our lives. Like Dr. Gary Schwartz said once at Kardec Radio, if we read these books, especially André Luiz books through Chico Xavier, we may shortcut in the advancements of science. This past week, Dr. Stephen Post, who is another scientist, friends of Kardec Radio, friends of the Spiritist movement, he called us because of his latest release. Though he is a professor at Stony Brook University at the School of Medicine, he has been researching on the impact of doing the good, saying how much it changes our lives, even physically, to the point that over the years he created this report to It's Good to Be Good. But after this collaboration with us, the Spiritists, since 2016 especially, he decided to go to a different route. He wrote a book about God. When a faculty at a university in the United States writes a book about God, it's the sign that the world is really changing. And he talks about synchronicity. He called us this past Sunday saying, Vanessa, I have the new book. I think you should talk about it at Kardec Radio. Okay, so let's do the interview. And if it's not enough, knowing about the importance of doing the good and finding God, he's offering 30 books to Kardec Radio's listeners. Why we're saying this? The impact of the teachings, especially Kardec's and the ones brought through Chico Xavier, are so transformative that they are already transforming lives beyond our Spiritist centers, beyond it. So the talk tonight comes to us as an opportunity for us to observe what we're yet to grasp so we can multiply and keep doing our share. Because when we talk about Chico Xavier, we're talking about this legacy on doing the good in all ways and means. So we brought an expert in the field. Geraldo Lemos Neto is an expert. First, because he had this 21 years of relationship with Chico Xavier, constantly a beautiful story about their friendship and how Geraldo, at such a young age, decided to embrace it because Chico Xavier was already senior at the time. A beautiful friendship that he cherished. He never took it for granted. On the contrary, cherished it so much that Geraldo, I would say, based on our observation, he tailored his life around to multiplying this message and more of what Chico Xavier has done. He opened a publisher that is publishing books that people didn't have access until now because Chico Xavier wrote so much that many of his writings are yet to be published. And he also founded um, a museum, I would say. It's a museum that has spiritist activities like a spiritist center in the very city of Piro Leopoldo, where Chico Xavier used to live at the house. So when you go to Brazil, it's a place you want to stop by. In the city of Piro Leopoldo, a beautiful, it's almost like American style, I would say. Everything, the technology and the resources for people to feel the the dimension of what we're talking about. And he travels around the world in his free time, and he makes free time to make it happen, to share more of it. And he never asks for anything in return. There is no payment. There is no like, oh, I give and then there is something else. There's no catch. The catch is of the heart, is to share what really changed or made gave a new meaning to his own life. This is the much I want to say much more about Geraldo Lemos Neto because he's non-stop. He has 10,000 projects happening at the same time. A beautiful team in Belo Horizonte by the Projeto Saber Amar, Saber Espiritismo. It's beautiful, a beautiful group. And but we don't have time because he has more important things to share. Okay, I was just giving him some time to catch his breath because he just landed. Marlo and him just landed in DC, right, Daisy? And they were coming here. Daisy was kind to bring them here, so you're good. Paloma set aside a glass of water, so now we're ready for you. Thank you.
Passa aqui. Uh-huh. All right. Hello, everyone. Please do forgive my English. Okay, and my appearance after 9 hours of traveling. I was supposed to land at 2:37 p.m. and my flight was the only one canceled by American Airlines in Miami Airport today. So, and we went to Boston, and then there was a huge after taking off at Boston Airport. There was a huge thunderstorm in New York, so the plane was headed to Syracuse, then to Petersburg, and then to Baltimore, and then here. So finally, we just ask the forgiveness for American Airlines. Well, we are here to talk about Chico Xavier and his role as a prophet, as a medium of pre-science, the mediumship or for to foresee the future. We know up to this date that there is 525 books published by Chico Xavier mediumship. That's a lot. 525 books already published. Have you all read them all? Me neither. So we are good. If we count the books from Kardec, the 558 books. And in the last 8th of July, we commemorate, we celebrate 92 years of love, because Chico Xavier started to psychograph in the 8th of July of 1927. And he didn't stop because of his death. After that, almost 90 books have already been published from the originals that he left for, for different people. And in the work of Allan Kardec, at the Spiritist book, we can see this. Religious ideas, far from losing something, become greater as they walk along science. And this is very, very important. In the same spirit, Chico Xavier told at the program Pinga Fogo in São Paulo in 1971, we are at the brink of a new era in which science shall unveil an immense future to us before the universe. Chico Xavier recognizing the importance of science. In 1616, this great revelation was done by Galileo Galilei, the revelation of the macro world, when he invented the telescope. In 1663, the revelation of the micro world, done by Robert Hooke, by his invention of the microscope. And in 1857, the revelation of the Spirit's book, the Spirit World, by Allan Kardec, studying the phenomena of mediumship. And who is that guy? Look at that picture. Chico Xavier in 1966 at the Rockefeller Center in New York, looking to the Empire State Building. What now? Where do we go from now? Is it bad to predict the future? This is something, right? Is it bad to predict the future? It depends who is predicting it, right? It very much depends on that. Dr. Marlene Nobre from Brazil, she was the founder of the Spiritist, the Medical Spiritists Association in São Paulo, also the Brazilian one, and also the international one. Once she told us, the practice of futurology does not by any means restrict or curtail the development of the scientific field. Rather, it broadens it greatly, foreseeing for this century even more significant discoveries than those of the past. A new outlook is upon us. A new universe to be researched opens up. New laws to be understood. New concepts to be established. But who has already made a prediction regarding the future we are starting to experiencing now? these hands of Chico Xavier, through these hands, we got all kinds of revelations, all kinds of prophecies, all kinds of anticipations of the futures. Sorry. And his guide, Emmanuel, was the one to protect him in this work. It took Chico Xavier 75 years to psychograph and also to be inspired by the spirits, also uh, through the mediumship of talking, receiving the spirits by the voice, and all of that was a result of 436 books published until the date of his death. And as I said, from that time on, more 90 books has already been published also. But let's look at his work. First, we have 5 most important books of Emmanuel, his romances or novels. Uh, and at that time, Chico Xavier psychographed them in the 30s and 40s. And at that time, he was very much criticized because in the point of view of history, it was all wrong. He was combated by historians for 70 years. But after the year 2000, a lot of research, uh, doctorships and masters in all over the world about Roman society of the first, the second, and the third century, and also historians that look upon the history of the 17th century, which is the book Renunciation, Renúncia in Portuguese. Nowadays, we have more than 2,000 concrete pieces of evidence validating historical facts that are now acknowledged by science. Facts that were not known or understood in 1938 until 1947, when Chico Xavier psychographed those stories. And I want to say about our dear friends that researched that. Marco Paulo Denucci de Espírito researched the book 2,000 years ago. And he himself found 208 points of confirmation in nowadays works of doctorships and masters in history of the first century, Roman history of the first century, that were not known. Those works were only published after 2004. So it's a confirmation what Chico Xavier was telling us. For instance, another friend of ours, Kaique Assunção from Rio de Janeiro, also found out in a book written in Latin and published in Russia the specific citation of Publio Lentulus, the Roman senator that Chico Xavier wrote in his 2,000 years ago. So it's a fact. It's not fantasy anymore. It's a fact. Another friend of ours researched on renunciation and found out lots of evidences in Scotland, in France, and here in America, in Connecticut, regarding this book. So this is very much impressive. But for for us, of course, the works of André Luiz are the ones that calls our attention most. And research done by Dr. Marlene Nobre and Dr. Décio Iandoli Jr. in Brazil can relate to this anticipations of the science, anticipation of the future. So for over 70 years, André Luiz wrote through Chico Xavier prophetic revelations. The main works he wrote like 28 books, but the main ones are the ones that are related to science. Those that started with nosso lar, our home, right? There's a picture there of Dr. Carlos Chagas, who was the last life of André Luiz, with Mr. Einstein in Rio de Janeiro in the 20s. They were visiting the National Museum that unfortunately was burned to the ground. Okay, then André Luiz is the development of the medical spiritist paradigm. Is that right? Paradigm. Okay. He wrote 28 books beginning in 1943, great contributions to biology and medicine, endorsement and supplementation of the scientific concepts of the time, anticipation of knowledge by more than a half century. And through Chico Xavier, some of the aspects that can be addressed. A holistic vision of the being, the power of the spirit over the body, the successive reincarnation, the evolution of the species, that of course was way before his works. As we all know, the works of Allan Kardec and Darwin were at the same time almost. Allan Kardec published the Spiritist book in 1857, and The Origin of the Species was published in 1859, the first edition. The second edition of the Spiritist book was 1860. The second edition of the Origin of the Species was 1861. And so there were parallel workers, right, by the divine inspiration, of course, one in science and the other one in the Spiritist revelation. Charles Darwin was born in 1809 and he lived until 1882. Kardec was born in 1804 and lived until 1869. But Charles Darwin had the support of this man, Alfred Russel Wallace. He was very much responsible for all the work. And it's very interesting that we can find that this man lived until 1913. In his book that is called The Scientific Aspect of the Supernatural, Mr. Wallace saying the evidence of the appearance of the supernatural, human or spiritual beings is as reliable and definite as any other evidence could be. That's very interesting. A man of science wrote in his book the scientific aspect of the supernatural, that spiritual beings uh, is as reliable and definite as any other evidence could be, the evidence of the spiritual beings. So we have the evolution of the species, works of science, and we have nowadays lots of new understanding of this. And we can find in Chico Xavier's work, in the book A Caminho da Luz, on the way to the light, remarkable understanding about this. On the chapter Amazing Experiments, and also in the book Evolution in 2 Words by André Luiz, in which he told us in each human creature lies within the very tissue of their organs the heritage of the millions of internships they have completed in the lower kingdoms. Talking about the evolution. In the way to the light by Emmanuel, in the chapter The Ancestors of Human Beings, we can also find Emmanuel saying cave-dwelling anthropoids scattered forming the prototypes of future races, and the spirit entities imprinted them with new biological characteristics. So Emmanuel wrote in 1938 that we as a species, the Homo sapiens species, we were genetically, how do you say that? Modified by spiritual entities, higher entities, of course. And in the book The Messengers, André Luiz will state, from the chimpanzee, the law of heritage, genetic law, continues in humankind with slight modifications. The difference is like just 0.5% in DNA from us and the chimpanzee. But Emmanuel tells us that we do not descend from the apes, but we are like brothers, or in a different chain of development, because we were modified by spiritual entities. In the chapter The Great Transition, Emmanuel will say that reincarnation fills all the gaps of Darwin's and Wallace's theories, as it also further validates Lamarck, without denying genetics its mechanisms of transmission of traits. Oh, this is André Luiz in the book Evolution in 2 Words. The evolution takes place in 2 words. Now we can talk about the constitution of the human being, the spirit and the soul, the physical bodies, the earthly one, and the double etheric or vital body, the spiritual bodies or perispirit, the subtle bodies, the mental bodies 1 and 2, and also the causal body. Those were all revelations by André Luiz. Of course, he was not writing this for the first time, because we know that the ancient Easterners from Asia, ancient religions already talked about those bodies. But he cited 7 bodies. we as a human being has we have 7 bodies, and also we have 7 vital centers as chakras. André Luiz also stated that in his books. So what is he talking about? He is talking about the spirit and the matter. We have to know about that if we are to understand spiritism. We have to know about those bodies, those physical material bodies, and our spirit. Is this only religion, philosophical thoughts? No. This is already science. Dr. Robert Sheldrake published in 1981 a book that is A New Science of Life, where he speaks about what he calls morphogenetic fields. So he talks about the chakras. And in Brazil, Dr. Hernani Guimarães Andrade uh, was the first one to make this saying of that the perispirit is the biological organizer model. And the 7 vital forces centers or chakras are now being studied in Austria, what they call the geopathic zones. Zones, is that right? Yeah, at the Johannes Hospital in Salzburg, Austria. The first works were published there in 2005. Nowadays we have science researching on this matter of the human being, and it's all of his bodies, what they call the meta system. Dr. Michael B., Dr. Ian Stevenson, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Dr. Kazuo Murakami, Dr. Robert Sheldrake, Dr. Amit Goswami, and of course all the research on the experience of near death, and also the TVP, therapy of past lives. Another topic, physics. André Luiz wrote through Chico Xavier that dense matter is condensed radiant energy. In the book Evolution in 2 Words, he stated, ultimately, we will come to know that matter is coagulated light, divine substance, which suggests the omnipresence of God. And also he stated in 1958 that the electron is dissociated. At one time that science on Earth didn't think so. Nowadays we know that because of all of the accelerators of particles and so on. Let's talk about what Chico received about the thought. In the book Thought and Life, Emmanuel wrote, electricity is dynamic energy, magnetism is static energy, thought, electricity, and magnetism join together in all as manifestations of universal life, creating gravity and affinity, assimilation and disassimilation in the multiple fields of form that are used by the spirit in the pilgrimage to reach supreme goals outlined by the divine plan. So first, Emmanuel, in the book Thought and Life, wrote that the thought, human thought, is an electromagnetic force. Later on, In the book Mechanism of Mediumship, André Luiz in 1958 enlightened us more because he wrote, each spirit generates within itself an unimaginable potential of mental electromagnetic forces, exteriorizing in this physic current the resources and values it accumulated within itself. So the thought, it's not only electromagnetic force, but also mental electromagnetic force. And André Luiz also tells us about the mental current. Every particle of the mental current, born from the emotions and the most secret desires of the spirit, moves itself about producing electromagnetic irradiations, whose frequency varies according to the mental state of the transmitter. So everything is up to us, is up to our mind, to our spirit. We are the generator of sublime forces that are manifested by the thought and by our feelings. We must understand that to evolve. So, in small talk, matter is energy. Everyone knows that. This is not spiritism. This is Einstein. Thought is composed of superluminal waves. André Luiz will, in some of his books, tell us about this. This is an anticipation of science. And he also said that thought is of a particular shape and nature. Those are the abbreviations of the books there. And nowadays, we are, of course know that Albert Einstein in 1907 taught us that matter is energy and vice versa. André Luiz talked about that 50 years later in 1957, but he added something. He wrote that matter is coagulated light. He pointed to a bridge to understand that light is also a very important thing to understand. And he wrote also that the electron is dissociable. And nowadays we know by the Tyler-Einstein experiment, the model of Tyler-Einstein, that thought is superluminal matter, as André Luiz said. And also we can understand that studying the theory of superstring. The Scientific American magazine published this issue that it's called The Neuroscience of Identity, where it publishes the research on the studies of consciousness. And we can understand there that thought through electromagnetics model is possible, and the quantum model. How was that done? By the experiment of Jacobo Greenberg Zibelbaum was a practical experiment conducted by scientists to corroborate the quantum thought model. And they understood the non-local interaction of consciousness experiment. That conscious that we spiritists call the spirit is a non-local thing. It's not material. It's not of the tissue of space and time. And so that we can understand, interact with matter, no matter regardless of the distance. So we as spirits, as they call the, the, the conscience, can produce forces, electromagnetic forces, that can surpass immense, that how do you say, uh, distances, immense distances. There is also another theory, that's the biological quantum theory, that corroborates this, that the conscious is non-local. Uh, the conscious is embryonic on atoms and molecules. They are rudimentary in bacteria and cells. They are conservative in vegetables. They are instinctive in animals. And they are intelligent in human beings. That's the biological quantum theory. And they say the mind exists in a non-local reality. It is outside the brain, outside the space-time tissue, but it interacts with the space-time tissue. It produces forces through the space-time, through matter. Dr. Eugene Wigner was the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1963. He talked about the quantum consciousness, and he wrote, "The brain is described in an ordinary fashion in quantum mechanics, but not the mind. It is not subordinated to the laws of physics. Thus, any act of looking, observing, determines the quantum collapse specific to the particles that constitute the brain." And he also concluded that the quantum action of thought takes place in the biological space-time. That was in the 60s. He was a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1963, but André Luiz talked about that before him. Like in chapter 4, Thoughts of Beings in the Mechanisms of Mediumship, that was published in 1959, he told us that animals has fragmental waves of thoughts, that the human mind has short, medium, and long waves of thoughts, and the angelical beings have super, ultra short rays of thoughts. And he told us also in another book that we should care to our animals, because they are also beings. They also have their minds. Missionários da Luz, Missionaries of Light, of the Light, is the book where Alexander told us that. Chico Xavier, in this book, Chico Xavier, the friend of the animals, will say, oh yes, animals have souls and are like our best friends. There's Fofa, a Pekingese. I don't know how to say in English. Pekingese? Yeah. She was very angry. You could not approach Chico when she was around. She was very jealous of him. And nowadays, what does science say? Pekingese? Yeah? Pekingese? Okay. What does science say? We now know that animal instrument, the harmful use of animals in higher education, we should care about that. That animals are beings sentient, how do you say that? Sentient beings. Yeah. Dr. Gregory Bateson published Mind in Nature, a Necessary Unit, and other books he wrote. And he told us that mind, the cognitive process of life's manifestations. What is mind for Dr. Gregory Bateson? Is the cognitive process of life's manifestations. All living beings have a mind, he states. What's something that André Luiz wrote decades ago. In the Cartesian vision, only human beings had a mind, but not nowadays. Science has proven on the contrary. In 2009, I guess, there was this meeting of 26 neuroscientists in the University of Cambridge in Great Britain, and they published a letter stating that mammals, birds, and some invertebrates have consciousness. We can no longer pretend that we did not know that, the statement says. That statement, that is called a Statement of Cambridge, from Cambridge, was signed by 26 neuroscientists. You can see how through Chico Xavier, some anticipations of the truths came through his books, through his mediumship, like just a glimpse of some interesting themes that 10, 20, 30, 40, 70 years later, science would come to confirm. It's most interesting talk about cellular and molecular biology. André Luiz did state that the cellular mental structure, the states of mind and their influence on the genes. He wrote about the biosphere, there's an S here, biosphere, or unities of psychosomatic force. That's in white is André Luiz writing, okay? When I put yellow is the science confirming it. But at the time that André Luiz wrote that in 1947, nobody understood what he was talking about. And Dr. Décio Iandoli Jr. Was given the task to find out about what is biosphere, what André Luiz is talking about that. And he was doing a research on that, and he came to a fellow medical professional in the northeastern state of Paraíba, and she was an expert, and he called her and asked her about that. And she was very surprised. And why are you asking me that? I can't talk to you now. I have to give some time on this subject. Can I call you in a week from now? And Dr. Décio said, oh, no problem. But he did not reveal to her what was his intention. He was researching one of Chico Xavier's work of André Luiz, talking about the unities of psychosomatic force that André Luiz called the biosphere. And then 1 week later, she called back, and she was very amazed and very surprised because her, how do you say, orientador? Her mentor at the university, pardon me? Okay, her advisor at the university there was writing about this subject, but it was not published yet. And nobody knew the conclusions that he went different from science and up to that date. And the conclusions of this man was the very same ones that Andrea Lees wrote 70 years before. And Dr. Decio told me, Geraldinho, I could not tell her that this was not a mystery. Because 70 years before, Andrea Luiz was telling us about that. And it was first mentioned in the 18th century by August Weismann. Also, you know that Andrea Luiz anticipated the importance of the mitochondria on the cell in the book Evolution in Two Words. He stated there that the cell is a rudimentary intelligent principle. Cells are intelligent principles of rudimentary nature, serving both animals and human beings. Chapter 5. Oops, sorry. We study the mental structure of cells. The mental structure of cells. It was written in 1958, so as to begin to take part in a higher learning with regards to the fluids that enable manifestation, all of which have their mental origin interwoven in the essence of primary matter or corpuscular breath of God. Chapter 5. Emmanuel Wood wrote in the book Thought and Life that depression influences cells undergoing mitosis, establishing factors of disaggregation. Chapter 15. That was in the 50s, right? Now science, thought and matter. Matter is energy, that's not new since 1907. But what is new is that in August 2016, the Nature Medicine Review, volume 22, number 8, stated that negative thoughts cause the physical body to become ill. A revelation anticipated by 43 years by Andrea Luiz in 1958, and Dr. Jerry Satinover wrote about that in 2001. Cellular and molecular biology. Andrea Luiz wrote, the spirit influences the cytoplasm. Is that right? Cytoplasm. 1958. Dr. Jeffrey Satinover, 2001. Dr. Bruce Lipton, 2005. I have to go faster, sorry. Dr. Kazuo Murakami, in 1997, wrote the book Something Great, stating that mental structures influences genes. Also about that, Dr. Bruce Lipton in 2005. Andrea Luiz would write about the mitochondria. By means of mitochondria, which could be considered accumulations of spiritual energy in the shape of granules, assuring cellular activity, the mind transmits to the physical vehicle to which it adjusts itself during the incarnation, all of its happy or unhappy states. Evolution in Two Words, Chapter 7. Thereby balancing or disturbing the cycle of cause and effect of the forces it releases during the endothermic process, maintaining the biosynthesis. Chapter 7. So we understand through the writings of André Luiz, through Chico Xavier, that feelings and ideas came or come from the intelligent principle. I'm writing intelligent principle, so animals have feelings and ideas also. Thoughts as an electromagnetic mental force comes from the mental body. So it's a matter, it's a manifestation of the spirit. And ultimately, it will reach the cellular function of the physical body. So nowadays we have feelings, thoughts, and health all together, all interrelated. The psychologist Robert Ader and the immunologist Nicholas Cohen in the 70s, they wrote about the psychoneuroendocrino immunology. Is that right? Big word, right? Also, they study the placebo effect, the evidence of the influence of the mind over the body. Dr. Camden Spurt studied the emotion and immunity, the influence of the neuropeptides, the biochemistry of emotions. Dr. Kazuo Murakami at the Tsukuba University in Japan sorry, wrote the book Divine Code of Life, stating that mental attitude modifies genes. Dr. Kevin Egan of MIT wrote at the review Science in 2001, August, about the epigenetic reprogramming and what he called the imprinted. Dr. Bruce Lipton wrote the book The Biology of Belief. It is neither hormones nor neurotransmitters that command our bodies, but rather our beliefs. And Dr. Harold Koenig, I don't know how to pronounce this. Koenig? Okay. Is writing about the spirituality that decreases depression, decreases suicides, decreases alcohol and drug abuses, improves immunity, and decreases CVA and IAM. André Luiz would write about the etiopathogenesis and the subtle bodies. Illness is a spiritual disharmony. He would wrote about the profound causes of illness in the spiritual body, and also he would wrote about the mental addictions generating disharmony in the vital centers, and also that mental suggestions like an incubator of bacteria, and about the reflective circumstances, destructive images, repeated destructive images causes suicides. The body as a divine vase, the miraculous charcoal. And he also would wrote about the causes of cancer. That all we can find in his books, the etiopathogenesis, the soul, harmonic thoughts and feelings, commands, order and synchronicity, health. Disharmonic commands of thoughts and feelings produces the misalignment and dysfunction of the body and the diseases. As Dr. Diaz da Cruz, through the voice of Chico Xavier, told in 1957 in the book Voices of the Great Beyond, in the pages 74 and 75, all violence done by us against others means dilaceration within ourselves. So, so nowadays we have the new physiopathology that we can say that practical applications of Andrea Louis concepts already confirmed by science. The transdimensional interaction of the soul through the spiritual bodies, the perispirit, the mental body, until reach the physical body and the double etheric body. Physical etheric interface. Cause and effect relationship. The soul is the cause. The perispirit or the spiritual bodies are the medium. The effect we can see at the physical cells in our bodies. So the physiopathology of the soul, feelings and ideas are not material, are the product of the spirit. But they produce thoughts that are material, that are a force, a mental electromagnetic force. That we can say it's the vehicle of feelings. And ultimately, illness comes from the inside out, producing diseases in our body. Depression and cancer. Andrea Louise will say that the mind can cause rupture of cellular harmony. Sorry. Disarticulate the synergism among cells, promote emergency of tumors and metastases. Illness result from spiritual disharmony, devices of the mind after the vital centers, in all those books that I put there, from 1954 to 1959. And also he would say that the perispiritic, what he called the perispiritic shrinkage, the trauma caused by violence of the soul. The epiphysis of pineal gland, it's a whole new chapter that Andrea Louis anticipated. At the time he wrote about the pineal gland, science on earth just related to her as a non-special gland, very small importance, just in childhood. And Andrea Louise would say that it governs the realms of emotions, that controls the endocrine system, that commands subconscious forces, that supplies organs with physic energy, all of that. One of the most important sources of creation. Mental life gland, the pineal gland is the mental life gland. All of that in 1945. Only in 1958, Dr. Lerner at the University of Yale isolates melatonin and began the studies of the importance of the pineal gland. All of that is stated by Andrea Louise in the book Missionaries of the Light in 1947. He states that the reincarnation only completes when the child reaches 7 years old. All of that, the pineal gland is the one that is governing all of this. And also the primordial function of mediumship. Nowadays, we have science going through that. The neural connections with the pineal gland at the thalamus, the cerebral trunk, the medulla, the cerebellum, the sympathetic ANS, at the book of Science Time, from from fertility to mood, sunlight found to affect human biology, and that was published in 1998, and after that in 2002. Uh, Mediumship. It is the gland of mediumship. Dr. Persinger, is that right? Application of transcerebral complex magnetic fields and mystical experiences. It was published in 2003 and concluded that the pineal gland is responsible for visions, for what he called proprioceptions, diverse sensorial experiences, and the pineal is the physiological means to mediumship. He applied transcerebral complex magnetic fields in 500 volunteers. And we have the works of Dr. Sérgio Felipe de Oliveira in Brazil studying that, the crystals, the correlation, and so on, the effects of melatonin. But in 1947, as I told in the book Missionaries of the Light, André Luiz anticipated all of that by 60 years. And nowadays, we have it published in the Neuroendocrinology Letters. It was published in 2014 at the PubMed. That's the Neuroendocrinology Letters, 2013, sorry, number 34. The works of Doctors Giancarlo Lucchetti, Jorge Dyer Jr., Décio Iandoli Jr., Juliane Gonçalves, and Alessandra Lucchetti. They wrote about the historical and cultural aspects of the pineal gland, comparison between the theories provided by Spiritism in the 1940s and the current scientific evidence. This is very much important. I will put some, see here. This study, the sensorial functions, the chronobiology, biological cycles. Look, it affects electrostatic fields, electromagnetic fields, and so on. Everything that André Luiz wrote is being now achieved by science. The perception of electromagnetic fields. This works was published in 1980 of Dr. Schneider and Vollrath. The other one in 1978, Dr. Harvalik, Anatomical Localization of Human Detection of Weak Electromagnetic Radiation. Also the magnetic field sensitivities in animals at the Annual Review of Psychology in 1984. The perception of radio waves was done in this work here in 2007, September 7. Dr. Schmid, Uberbacher, Samaras, and so the dielectric properties of human pineal gland tissue and RF absorption due to wireless communications devices in the frequency range. So the role of the brain is another subject. André Luiz wrote in 1947 that our brain has three steps, pardon me? Andares? Levels, 3 steps, yeah, 3 levels. and it called the triune brain. The first one, the subconscious at the cerebellum, the spinal medulla and cerebellum, primitive experiences in the vegetable and animal kingdoms have already become conditioned reflex, uh, directed especially toward the maintenance of the physical body or the physical life. The second level is the conscious one, the motor cortex, the, that we assess our current acquisitions under experimentation. And the third level is the superconscious, the frontal lobes, the future stimuli and aspirations. It was wrote in 1947, as I told you. And nowadays, all of this works, Dr. Décio Iandoli Jr., Dr. Ivenia Prada e Dr. Luiz, Sérgio Luiz, of Rio Grande do Sul, they talk about this in the book The Triune Brain, O Cérebro Triuno, where they compare all the revelations of André Luiz through Chico Xavier in 1947 with the knowledge of science nowadays, especially Dr. Paul MacLean, that in 1968 wrote the same thing, that the mind and the structure of the human body, of the human mind, is divided in three levels. His book was his work was uh, showed in Congress, in a medical congress in 1968. It was showed again in 1969, but it was only published as a book in 1990. The book is The Triune Brain in Evolution. So, decades after André Luiz wrote through Chico Xavier. The same conclusions. So, going to the end of our talk, we can understand that mental illness also, impatience, sadness, harmony disintegration, schizophrenia, senile dementia, all of that is also talked about in Chico Xavier's work. No Mundo Maior, in the Greater World, other books also, Ação e Reação, Action and Reaction. He also talks about spiritual anamnesis, the history of current illness and karmic record, which is now doing by the TVP researchers. We can assess now studies like Dr. Harold Gunning, all of those about this, the guilt complex, the karmic record as a mental disruption in the mind, in the spiritual mind, that can be assessed even by surgery. And we can understand also through Chico Xavier's and André Luiz's work that there are complementary spiritist therapy, healing from within, self-healing, encouragement towards health, self-knowledge and inner transformation, fluid therapy, prayer, passes, and water. All of that is talked about Chico Xavier. And in science by Dr. Koenig, Dr. Dolores Kruger, that researched about the passes. Is that right? In English, passes? Okay. Also homeopathy, this obsession, Dr. Alan Sanderson, all of that, and also the healing through the means of forgiving. The bioethics, we can state by knowing the Chico Xavier's work and André Luiz's works that all spiritists have to have this bioethics against abortion and against euthanasia. Is that the word in English? Euthanasia. Against intervening in the embryo's gender also. That's bioethics. And we can understand the power of love. It is not enough to believe in the immortality of the soul. The enlightenment of our own selves is unavoidable. What matters is to lift the heart while breaking free from the great walls that imprison us in the shadows. Forget the illusions of possession, lacerate the vials of vanity, abstain from the little liquor of personalism. Our essential mission is to convert the earth entirely into an august temple of God. As we see what this man, Chico Xavier, did in his 92 years of life, 75 of those we just passed the deadline of 50 years that were given to us, this time frame that started in 1969 when Apollo 11 landed on the moon at 20th of July 1969. And from that time on, Chico told us, we're given 50 years to humanity. Just not to to transform the earthly world in a divine world, but just to respect one another and to refrain the impulse of destruction, of annihilation. And we achieved that because the deadline was July 20th this year, 1919. And Chico Xavier told me, Geraldinho, if we do this, if we can just suportar, put up with one another, with our differences in religion, in opinion, in politics, in everything, if we just can do this, nobody can predict what can come from that time on, from July 20th, 1919, to the future of humanity. And he told me, and I can testify this, that science would have an immense, important role in this process. That medical science would come to find the cure for all illness, all of that, that we could discover amazing things about the universe, and that we also could be in touch with other extraterrestrial civilizations, and that they will help help us to understand what for now it's not understandable, and we will come across the knowledge that we are not the only world created by God, that we are not the only humanity living, that we are part of a greater good, a greater spectrum of humanities spreading all over the universe, the known universe, and also the universe that we don't even know yet. So this will come, and this will come fast, because he himself, in 1971, told at the program Pinga Fogo online at the Brazilian television in 23rd of December that Emmanuel, his mentor, said that in 2057 Earth will be a regenerated world. So it's not long from now, 38 years from now. And he also stated that if we could put up with one another in this time frame of 50 years, that we would enter in a phase of rapid transformation. That's the time now for those rapid transformations, to change the paradigm from the material one to the spiritual one. And we have until 2057 to do that. So help us God. Thank you, friends.
It's beautiful. And although Geraldo shared with us much of evidences that have been validating the teachings, when we read these books, we find out that science will have to work very hard to validate the many more. But it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. From Kardec to Chico Xavier's teachings, you can tell there's a whole lot more. As Dr. Gary Schwartz said, if we pay attention to it, we're gonna shortcut building up protocols that will be, he doesn't give us the protocols, but he gives us already the direction, and we can expedite, as you're saying, the advancements because of these revelations as well. It's amazing that the books by André Luiz came to life. All the ones, Mechanisms of Mediumship and Evolution into Worlds, before the deadline. So we have everything that we need to plus Kardec's. So even for us in our daily lives, as we want to bring these teachings, this is not a scientific uh, realization for us. It's about us. So all these teachings, they bring to us direction for our daily lives. If we can just highlight the most important part of it all that Geraldinho brought to us about love, that part, we are being called to open our hearts, to forgive, to be together, to stop creating dissensions in our lives, in our families, in our own self. And it's our choice. We make a choice. We cannot afford any longer separations amongst people. We needed to work in our ethical, moral aspects to work in harmony with the governance of the planet. Like any student in school, any student, you have a range of things you can do, but there's a deadline to be fulfilled. And if we don't, we fail. This deadline serves to all of us. There is no threat, there's just acknowledgement. It's just they are giving. We're so blessed that we're given the opportunity to know. To wrap up, let's think about this. How many lives have we lived in choosing the material life? All of the previous ones? We hope that in this life we're going to reinvent ourselves and prioritize what is most important, using matter to achieve it. Matter is our friend, the material body, the material world. Money is a companion, but it's not the end of our journey. It's not the goal. Prioritizing relationships, prioritizing the moral aspects of life. Like we've seen last week, the power of togetherness, a very important realization in Spiritism. In the book, the Spirit book by Kardec, we get to know that selfishness is distancing us from the fulfillment of the best of us. So the more we can think of others instead of thinking only of ourselves, the more we're going to be in harmony with everyone that is working together for the progress of humanity. Choices that we need to make every day. When we hear these teachings, it came through the hands of a man that forgot about himself and is forever remembered. He's more than ever in our hearts and in our minds. Chico Xavier comes to us to tell us that Jesus' bar is not that high. It's possible to achieve that level. When last week we were talking about Jesus as our guide and model, and Chico Xavier embraced it. Jesus didn't do any PhD, thank God. Because how can you follow that model? If you don't have a PhD. He was not a physician. He didn't even go to school. He was homeschooled. See? And nowadays, how hard can it be to follow Jesus? He didn't give us above what we can. He didn't live in a mansion, so we can follow him anywhere we live. He didn't even have his own house. Think about it. We die sometimes in our lives paying for mortgages. And Jesus says, take it easy. You don't have to die for this. He didn't even have a house of his own. He broke all the protocols. And Chico Xavier came as a good disciple and said, in modern life, it's true. And brought these revelations that are daily being validated by science. And more scientists today than yesterday are becoming acquainted with these works and studying them. For us as Spiritists, what can we do for our daily lives? Renounce the old conditionings and open ourselves for the new. And I have to say it. When our friends Geraldo Lemos Neto and Marlo come in their own free time to come and share with us, you see, for us, sometimes we take for granted. We think, oh, well, yeah, we're Spiritists, we all do it. Not necessarily. But this is what we're talking about. Because they could be in Paris now, or Hawaii, or wherever else, or sleeping in a hotel because they missed a flight. Not they missed a flight, the flight's canceled on them. Yeah. And they are here. So this is what we're talking about. They were tested. Geraldo especially was testing his. You're going to talk about Chico? Another test, right, Geraldo? Another one. But they made it. And the bags are not, the luggage is not here yet. So, go figure, go figure. And he delivered, he came here like nothing happened. And I'm not saying this, and he knows. He doesn't need our compliments. But our praises. But this is for us to reflect that we all are being called to do it, friends. We're all being called to do it. At the internet, those who are watching, there's so much work ahead. And all we need to do is to forget about ourselves and join forces so we can share the good. Talking about share the good, now we're going to dim the lights. Because of our special night, usually we do the passes with the help of our pass givers. But tonight, because it's super special, we're going to cut the middleman and the middle woman. And yeah. And we're going to receive the passes directly from the spirit doctors. Let's rest assured. Don't be sad like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to. You will. Without any intermediary. But what is the ideal mindset to receive what we need? What did Jesus say? Your faith healed you. Do we have faith? Do we believe in God? We cannot breathe without God. We're breathing because God wants us to breathe. So let us dim the lights, Tony. Thank you. And march towards